Welcome back. Day 2 at the USDAA trial in Prunedale, California. And if you watched the previous episode, you'll know that on day 1 we had an interesting day. A lot of kind of crazy running by Snips, a little out of control. But we did manage to get a Q in Snooker, and we did manage to get a Q in pairs, which means that today we're really focused on standard, because a Q in standard today means that we get our agility dog title, which means that we can move up to advanced at all subsequent trials. So that starter's standard run is really the focus today. But it starts with pairs. All right, so in consulting with my partner, it's determined that I'm going to run the second half of the course, which is the black dots, which means that I've got the weave poles and the dog walk to contend with during this run. So the first bit is definitely tricky. Given the speed with which you'll be coming out of that tunnel, hitting that weave pole entry is going to be really hard. So I expect that I'm going to need to throttle her to get her to come towards me to get the weave poles more in line, and then redirect her to the weave poles with my left arm. A loop around after that to the dog walk. We'll see what we get there. We haven't hit a contact on the dog walk all weekend, so I'm not optimistic. And then off the dog walk from the jump at 5 to the shoot at 6, I have a feeling that I'm going to need to throttle her to call her off of the A-frame. We'll see when the run goes on, but I'm definitely, when I'm walking it, I'm thinking, technically I should be able to do it with shoulder rotation, but I feel like I'm going to need a throttle there, so I'm ready to execute it. And then, running as quick as I can to beat her out of the chute so I can put a front cross in at 7. Given that moment of disorientation coming out of the chute, I feel like getting her, with shoulder rotation onto number 7 and then rear crossing number 7 to get to number 8, that's going to be a lot trickier and might result in an L-shaped rear cross, which I don't want to do. So one thing to understand as we watch this run is that my partner had already sort of E'd on the course, gone like way off course and not even completed the course. So there really was nothing to run for here. And so that'll explain some of the decisions that I ended up making on course. As an example of that, right at the beginning, you'll see that I held the throttle for a really long time. And the reason for that is that she was predicting that we were going to go to the weave poles. And I wanted to make sure that she responded to the throttle before I actually released her to the weave poles. So that explains why this particular bit there takes so long and I make her go all the way around. And of course, she misses the weave pole entry anyway. So let me pause for a second so I can explain what happens next. She pops the weave poles early, and then there's some indecision by me in this back corner. And I was thinking, maybe I would pull her off the course at that point, kind of make the point that if you don't do the weave poles successfully, the fun ends. But then I also realized, wait, I actually want to get this dog walk in because I want to see if I can get a successful dog walk here. If I do, then I could like throw a party at the end of the dog walk, and maybe that'll stick in her head later in the day when I need that dog walk contact in order to get my standard cue. So I decide to retry the dog walk. She flies it, so no party. I do have to throttle there. I do not get the front cross in, and I end up having to turn that into a rear cross. So the end result is an E, no time, no qualification, but again, the result here didn't really matter much. All right, so the next run of the day was Gamblers, and this is the course. And I spent a bit of time early on trying to think about ways I could get the dog walk involved in the opening to try to get a little bit of practice in on the dog walk and see if I could get a successful dog walk before I had to do my standard run. But given the, let's say, exuberance with which she's been running so far this weekend, I decided that that was as likely to result in her taking 2 of the gamble obstacles in succession during the opening as anything, and decided against it and opted to do the following instead. I decided to start by trying to rack up some points on the A-frame instead. She's been extremely consistent with her A-frame, this weekend as well as in previous trials, and so I thought starting on the A-frame and basically doing a front cross into the tunnel and then repeating the A-frame would be a good way to kind of rack up 8 points right there in the opening, 9 if you count the initial jump, before kind of heading out to the weave poles for the next section of the course. That next section involves taking the 2 jumps and then heading for the weave poles, and then out of the weave poles heading into the chute. And I'm doing this obviously because I want to try to get the weave poles in and get a little bit of practice in on the weave poles. Really, this is the section where I start vamping. I can send her from the chute over the tire and then back into the chute as needed. And really, the aim is when the buzzer goes to be able to basically begin the gamble this way, which is a front cross from the chute to the tire and then a front cross in decel position on the tire to send her into the gamble. So there's two basic ways really to handle 1 to 2, coming out of tunnel number 1 and into tunnel number 2. The first would be to pick her up on my left coming out of tunnel number 1 and then essentially do a 360-degree spin and use that momentum to send her into the tunnel at number 2. The main reason I don't do that is I'm a little worried that as I do that spin, she'll kind of head out wide and end up taking that red jump, that jump that I've highlighted in red there. Instead, with Snips, what I decided to do is just throttle her coming out of the tunnel at number 1 to kind of get her to come towards me and keep driving towards me. And then I can redirect her and send her into the tunnel at number 2. The only real danger there is maybe she'll go into the end of tunnel number 1 that she came out of. But in her case, I don't really think that's going to be what ends up happening. So I think it's a pretty safe choice. And then in one of those great agility moments, all that careful planning goes out the window within 2 obstacles because she ticks the bar on the first jump and then flies the A-frame, leaving me with no points at that moment. What I probably should have done at this point is just continued on with my plan, but instead I decided to try to pick up the A-frame twice by basically doing it again, going back instead of doing the tunnel going back, and then doing it again getting out to try to pick up 6 points. And she hits it successfully that time, but then she flies it this time. One of the things that's become abundantly clear to me at this point on the course is that she's not thinking. She's just running and not thinking at all about her job and what she's supposed to be doing. And you can hear that with me trying to get her to calm down and focus as I try to re-put her into the weaves. But that fact also becomes a little bit important later on. There, I'm trying to calm her down. She misses him a second time. From here, things go pretty much according to plan, although with the mistakes in the beginning and the couple of tries on the weave poles, the buzzer goes at a point when I only have 12 points, so I'm not going to get the cue here. But this send into the tunnel works well. And we'll freeze it for a second because it's going to look like this threadle didn't go very well, but in fact it worked really perfectly. What ends up happening is she gets tangled up in the gamble line itself. And so I'm like waiting for her to get clear of it, but she ends up completing the gamble successfully. So as I mentioned, we didn't get an E, and that's because with the knocked bar, the 2 missed A-frames, and the extra time taken on the weave poles, we didn't get enough points in the opening. We only got 12 points in the opening, and we needed 13, so we didn't actually qualify. But again, that doesn't really matter. I will say one thing that I think I'm going to take away from this is I've been generally throwing weave poles into things like gamblers as a way of practicing. But I think what I'm practicing is doing them incorrectly. So I think if you see for future trials, for things like gamblers where I have options, I'm not going to be throwing in obstacles like the weave poles where I don't feel like she's confidently succeeding. Which leads us to starter standard, which, as I've said, is the one run that I really care about on this day of the trial, because if I get the cue here, I get what I want out of the weekend. So this is the course, and I'll get into sort of analyzing it a little bit in a minute, but at the end of the day, barring some craziness, this is all going to boil down to the dog walk. She's either going to hit the contact on the dog walk, at which point I have a chance to get the cue that I want, or she's going to fly the dog walk, fly the contact, which is what she's been doing all weekend, and that's going to eliminate any chance for the cue. So that's what I'm facing as I go into this. So let's start by looking at 1 to 5 and my options for handling it. So obviously one option is to lead out to the tunnel and then run from that position to the position at the teeter there and execute a front cross. And that's definitely one option, but it's not what I choose to do. The key to this sequence in my mind is getting a tight turn from number 3 to the teeter. I don't want her to go long there, so then she's got to dig in and head back to the teeter. So to get that, what I'm going to do instead is kind of get myself into decel position and standing still at number 3 so that she knows to collect coming over number 3. She knows we're making a tight turn there. And then from there, I can just use shoulder rotation to get her onto the teeter. And then I can do a front cross at the base of the teeter, which will create that turn and take her to the tire. And I will note that under normal circumstances, I probably would have done that front cross actually in positional cue at the tire rather than at the decel position at the edge of the teeter. But if you recall from a run on the first day, when I kind of ran past the teeter, she flew it, and so I was trying to avoid that mistake on the day. That's something I obviously need to go back and train. 5 to 9 is then just a simple loop to the table, with the only real question there being whether she'll hit the contact on the A-frame. Similarly, from the table, there's a big loop, which includes the weaves, and basically takes us to the end of the dog walk, where the big question there is whether or not she'll hit the contact on the dog walk. And it's at the end of the dog walk that I have to make a choice. I could do what I'm showing here, which is basically run past the dog walk, kind of continue here, get her with shoulder rotation over that jump, and then rear cross from 14, rear cross on 14 to get her to make the slight turn from 14 to 15. I have some concerns with that approach. The first being, if I'm sort of turning to the right away from the dog walk, how will that affect her ability to hit that contact? And the other being that if she doesn't really read the turn, but she just reads the forward momentum and actually continues out and takes the number 1 jump. So instead, what I choose to do is to try to kind of keep running straight along with the dog walk to maximize my odds of her hitting the dog walk. And then get into a rough front cross position and do a front cross after she's off the dog walk to get her to turn off of the number 1 jump and onto number 13, after which it's just a straight run with the dog on my right to the finish line. And I'll be the first to admit that this is perhaps not going to be the cleanest choice, because I'll probably let her get off the dog walk before I throw in the front cross, so the timing is going to be wonky. But I'm making a few choices here because I'm going for the cue, and I'll be the first to admit that. This does come with some risks, the primary one being because I'm choosing to be late with that front cross cue, she may take the off-course jump at number 1 before I can execute it and get her onto the right jump. Okay, so before I show the run, let me talk a little bit about what I did before the run. So if you recall from the Gambler's run, my feeling is that she was so amped that she was not focused. She was just running crazily and not paying attention to doing her job on course. And I wanted to kind of try to deal with that. So what I did before this run is I actually took her to a field nearby, and I threw a frisbee with her for a good 10 to 15 minutes to get her actually tired, to get her worn out prior to the run, hoping that that would lead her to be more focused on the course. Now, with my other dog, my older dog, I would never do that because that would just cause him to be tired and slow. But given Snips' speed and drive, I thought that the sacrifice in speed from her being a little bit tired might actually be offset by the gain in focus from her not being so amped. And with that, I'm just going to let the run play itself out because it goes pretty much according to plan. She misses the weave poles, no surprise, and I have to call her pretty hard to keep her from going off course after the dog walk. But other than that, goes pretty much according to plan. Baby crying here, apologies for that. She gets a really nice run and a good deep hit on the dog walk. Very pleased about that. And so you can see me look up there to look back and see if there was any indication that I hadn't gotten the cue, but in fact we did. With a time just under 37 seconds and about 4.5 yards per second. So really, really pleasing run. All right, going to try and pick up the pace a little bit here as we move on to Starters Snooker. And this is the course, and as usual, I'm going to just go for 3 sevens in the opening, and this is how I'm going to accomplish that. Lead out to decel, and then do a front cross to go back around and into the number 7 tunnel. Out of the tunnel, it's a fairly straight shot to the next red with just a front cross post wrap to send her back into that tunnel. She comes out of that tunnel heading for the 3rd red, another front cross post wrap to send her back into that tunnel, and then out of the tunnel number 7, just wrap her around and send her into number 2. And then the The rest of the close is just a big loop up through 6A and 6B, at which point another front cross post wrap to send her into number 7 and head for the finish line. Now I'm aware that I may have to do a threadle there because she may sort of be directed towards number 2, and I'll be prepared to do that threadle. And this run goes pretty much according to plan, at least during the opening. To get a good tight turn there. A little wide around there, but still good. Lots of speed. Okay, tight turn there. A little slip on the dirt. This one I'm very happy with. A very nice tight turn there. Really great acceleration out of that. A little long outside the tunnel. Probably need to call a little bit harder. And then I think she just misjudges this jump and knocks that bar. But otherwise, I'm very pleased with that. I mean, I think that was shaping up to be really good. I make a dumb choice there and run in front of the tunnel and almost get my ankles taken out. But we didn't qualify because we didn't get far enough in the close. But very happy with the opening. Thought the opening worked really well. So we end the day, we end the weekend, and we end the video with advanced jumpers. Okay, so this is the course for advanced jumpers, and the first bit, 1 through 5, key here is running to position in number 4 and getting that front cross in, and then getting ahead so that it's clear that I want her to take that bottom tunnel. She's been patterned to take the top tunnel by Snooker, so I am a little bit worried. And I could throw a threadle in, but I decide in the end that if I get up far enough ahead, it should be clear that we're going to take tunnel number 5 instead of the top tunnel. There's a big loop here, and with that we're going to have a lot of speed, and that speed makes me worried that she'll continue out from number 8 to take that trap jump, or what I've labeled as that trap jump. So I decide here that I'm going to throw a threadle in. I'm going to be there and ready to throw the threadle in. Now, one of the implications of that coming up is that what I'd probably prefer to do in reality is this, is run up and throw a front cross in before that top tunnel, and then another front cross because I'll be up ahead on jump number 13. The danger of that is it could look like I'm trying to throw her into the bottom tunnel, but the real problem here is because of the threadle previously, I won't get there in time. So instead, I'm going to have to do a rear cross on that tunnel, which will put me behind and then force me to do a rear cross on number 13. And then in the end, technically it's just shoulder rotation and then a run to the finish line, but having watched Snooker, I know that a lot of dogs are going long and taking the bottom tunnel coming across that jump. So this is a place where I'm pretty sure I'm going to need a threadle in order to get her in to take the correct tunnel. And then what you'll see from the run is that a lot of my course read was actually quite wrong. But before we get there, I want to spend a little bit of time focusing on that first front cross that I'm planning to put in. And what I want to focus on is getting to decel position. So I think one of the keys to a good front cross is getting to decel position before you execute the front cross. That's even more important than the shoulder turn, the change of arm, or the timing of that. And what you'll see here in this clip is why that's the case. So I'll slow it way down when we get to that point, but what you're going to see is that my timing on the shoulder turn is actually really good. It's right at takeoff, but I'm still moving forward when that occurs. And what that causes is, rather than some collection and a recognition that we're going to change direction, she launches pretty far forward, and what you get is a front cross, which looks like this, which is I'm struggling to pick her up from behind me. She's digging in and trying to get around. And we definitely lose a lot of time on the course at that point. And I don't know if the front cross was a contributing factor, but you can see that a threadle was definitely called for there, despite what I thought. And then by contrast, I threadle there, but it's completely unnecessary. And then we just have a big bobble up here where for some reason I can't get her to take that jump. I have to threadle her there as suspected, and there's the finish line. And so no cue, obviously, but at our next trial we'll be in advanced and we'll begin our journey in advance to try to get ourselves to the master's level. And so thinking ahead and what am I going to be doing in training between these trials, I'll mention that my main focus is looking at these runs and sort of from what I saw when I was actually at the trial. Obviously, continuing to work on weave pull entries and dog walk contacts. I think those are two things that are going to remain a very big focus. In addition, going to be working on tighter turns around jumps. I think I'm not clear enough with my cues. She's not clear enough on acceleration, deceleration, collection. So going to be definitely focusing on working some collection and some tighter turns around jumps. Um, Definitely going to be working on the teeter and getting a better understanding that she needs to hold at the end of the teeter no matter what, whether I'm blowing past or not. And then finally, really, I'm just going to be focusing on coursework. I feel like our teamwork needs more focus, and the best way to do that is to just focus on doing courses and sequences. So with that, I will say goodbye, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Our next trial is an AKC trial, and that is in early May. See you then.